Hello and welcome to video number 4 in the plywood platform bed series. Today we're going to pump the brakes a little bit. We're going to go back and I'm going to show you guys some of the mistakes I've made on this bed so far. All right, let's get started. All right, I've brought you in close to this bed so we can get a close-up view of the problems. All the problems or the mistakes that I've made so far on this bed are where the rails, the side rails, the head and footboards, where they all meet the legs in that corner there. On all 4 corners there's some issues and they're all pretty much the same issues. So let's zoom in and talk about what happened. Here's a side view, a close-up of where both the side rail here and the foot rail here are meeting the legs. And you guys can probably already see a lot of issues going on, but we're going to cover these issues one at a time to keep things simple and brief. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the foot rail. And what you're going to see, I'm going to point to it right here, is this part of the foot rail that goes into the leg sits proud of the ledge by about 1/16 of an inch. So that's going to be the first thing we address. We're going to fix that with a hand plane. I'm going to use my low angle jack because for me that works better on the edge grain of this plywood here. All right, let's knock that out. Okay, so that's problem number 1 sorted out. You can see here I'm pretty good, pretty flush. Looks a little bit raggedy here, but that's okay. I'm gonna sand that up later. And I've got another plan for this whole thing that we're gonna talk about later. Don't wanna give that away just yet. So, public enemy number 2. You can see the proudness here, here, and here of these rails where they come into the leg. They're sitting higher than they should be. I've got a suspicion that it's because the notches on the rails or the depth of the notch on the leg itself just isn't deep enough. And that's what's pushing it up, because if you look here, we've got some proudness there as well. So this entire rail is sitting proud of the leg, which makes me think it's the depth of the notch on the leg itself that isn't quite deep enough. So we're going to look into that. If we make that a little bit deeper, that could solve all the problems that we're having right here in the corners. And again, I'll go around the bed and check all 4 corners for this. This is going to require me to take the bed apart. So we'll do a little time lapse here and see how it turns out at the end. All right guys, I've been messing with these notches here on this leg, on one leg, for quite some time now. You can see I've made some progress. I've kind of dug out that middle part. But what I'm finding out is that the slat that I put on the side rail hits this leg here, in this spot here. So I'd have to widen or take a little bit off of that whole thing for this to work. Things can get really hairy that way. It's gonna get away from me, probably get lopsided, humps in it, all that stuff. It's just gonna get kind of weird. It's gonna take a long time to fix with a plain chisels and a square. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm going to take the side rails here that we built and I'm gonna plane off this end, including some of this that sits on that big part of the leg that I just showed you. So I'm gonna plane that off. I'm gonna do that on both sides, test it and see how it works. Well, that didn't pan out. I fixed the problem with the proudness. You can see that right here. I fixed it a little too good. Now the leg is proud of the side rail, look at that, by just that much. But the proudness here is gone. And you'll see here too, that now I have this insanely huge gap right there. I fixed one problem but caused another one. My hand planing, I took too much off of that end. Now I've got that huge, just enormous, that great big huge gap right there. So I don't know what I'm gonna do with that yet. I'm a little upset at myself. I should have known better. I should have checked it, just taken a little bit off at a time. I was only a 1/16 of an inch off, if that. So I just went at it like a barbarian, and now I've got a barbarian size hole in my leg. Not quite sure what I'm gonna do yet. Good news is on the other 4 legs, I don't have that proudness right there. On the other legs, it's pretty even, so I don't have to adjust the bottom of the notch. To avoid this happening again, I'm just gonna hand plane the top of the rails. Where they meet the top of the leg, I'm gonna hand plane them down flush with the legs. Solve the other ones, so I don't do that same thing again. All right, well, that worked a lot better. I've got all the side rails, head and foot boards flush with the legs now on top. Looks a lot better. That's gonna be all for today though. My camera battery's about to die, and I need to go rethink life a little bit and how I made that huge mistake earlier to see what we're gonna do about fixing that later down the road. I'll come back tomorrow. We got some more issues to address. I'll put them in the same video. Come back tomorrow and we'll get back on those. All right, guys, we're back. I'm ready to tackle some more of these mistakes that I made. So the first one we're gonna fix today is right here. You'll see the face of this rail sits proud of the leg, or sits out from the leg by about 1/4 of an inch. And that happened on both the head and foot rails, on both sides of them. The fix for that is we're gonna take these rails off. I'm going to run them through the table saw. I'm gonna mark them first, then take them off and run them through the table saw just to trim that little lip off there so it's flush. But if I'm gonna talk about why this mistake happened, I also have to talk about why this mistake happened, this huge gap right here between the leg and the head and foot rail. These two mistakes are tied together by one reason. So before we get to fixing that, I need to explain that reason and what I did wrong. That way we don't make those same mistakes again in the future. Okay, so the reason we have these two mistakes can be traced back to when I was designing this bed in SketchUp. And what I did was I planned for all this plywood. This is a scrap from the actual plywood I've been using to build the bed. I planned on it being 3/4 of an inch, and that's what I based all my designs on. Well, I found out a little bit differently once I got those legs glued up together. I didn't even pay attention to it until then. But you'll recall the first video where we built the legs, took 7 pieces of plywood that I ripped from the table saw, then cut down into lengths, and we glued them together. When I got done with that, I measured that width, and it was not 5 1/4 like my plans called for, because I planned for 3/4 of an inch width on this stuff. It was about 5 1/16, a little less than 5 1/16. I tried to figure out what happened, and I went back and I measured this stuff. I measured the width of it, and what I found was that it is not 3/4. It's just about 1/32 of an inch shy of 3/4. So I had 7 pieces in each of my legs. Multiply a 32nd of an inch by 7. You can do the math yourself, but you get a number just over 3/16 of an inch. That's why my legs are short that way. I threw my other measurements off for my side rails and head foot boards, threw it all off. And then the reason that edge sticks out from the rail by about 1/4 of an inch is because I decided when I was making those legs, hey, I don't want a rectangle leg. I don't want one side to be 5 1/4 inches and one side to be 5 inches, so I ripped both sides down to 5 inches so I'd have square legs. And now I've got those 2 issues because of that. So I don't know if that 3/4 being short of 3/4 of an inch is a standard industry practice for plywood. I've got a hunch that it is. I just don't know enough about plywood to tell you if that's true, but you guys can measure it for yourself if you've got a ruler or a square that does 32 of an inch. So that's why that happened. We'll just fix these problems and we'll move on. All right, guys, so we finished up that issue where the rail edge set forward of the legs a little bit. I cleaned all that up. You can see I'm wearing a different shirt today, and that's because honestly, I had to take a couple days off and just walk away from this thing. And sometimes you got to do that. But while I was putting these rails through the table saw just to clean up that little edge, I screwed up, and this is what I did. Take a look at this picture. So I can't cut that out, you guys. I can't fix that really. So what I'm gonna do with that is I've saved sawdust from the plywood, and it's a handy little trick. Whatever project you're working on, whatever wood you're using, save some sawdust from it, put it in a paper cup and save it, because if you make a mistake like this, then you can mix that with some wood glue and pretty much match the color almost exactly. It's gonna be closer than just trying to buy wood filler and match it. Now let me show you these other pictures. While I had the legs off, I noticed this. I've got the rail turned on its side right now, and you can see that's that edge face. Same face that I just cut that saw mark in by accident that I got a wood fill now. And what you can see in the picture is that the bottom part of it sticks out just a little bit. And that's creating another gap on the leg, so this gap right here. So what I'm gonna do while I've got the rails off the bed is I'm gonna inspect all the edge faces like that. And if they have a part that sits proud, then I'm gonna trim that up. And I'll show you that right now, so let's get working on that. All right, guys, well, that one was too easy. It was just in that one rail in that one spot, and clean it up. It, as you can see in this picture here, closed up that gap pretty good. So the next issue is where the rails go into the legs. Again, all four corners. They stick out past the leg a little bit. The rail sits proud of the side of the bed, in other words. So I'm gonna mark all those with marking knives. I'm gonna bring them back to the bench, plane them down with a hand plane in a makeshift shooting board kind of way. All right, welcome to the world's most budget shooting board ever. So I've taken the side rail, I've clamped it to my bench. You can see there the clamps. I'm lifting it up with these two scrap pieces of plywood here, this one and this one. That's to get it up off the table a little bit, because if you look at the hand plane, see the mouth there? It doesn't go all the way to the edge of the hand plane. So I have to lift this up off the table in order to get this edge right here in its entirety. And I've used this piece of plywood that's clamped here to prevent breakout when I take the plane blade across this edge and I hit this spot right here. So this is just clamped in place. That's all it is, just to hold that, support these edge fibers here so they don't break out on me. All right, let me show you how this works. All right, so not bad. You can see that pretty much got me right on my line. Anything closer than that is just gonna be a sanding, you guys. I don't wanna get too carried away. Learn that lesson the hard way, huh? All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull the headboard up here now. I gotta do the same thing on it. So let me give you that, and then we'll move on to the next thing. All right, guys, that covers that. It should fit nice. We're gonna put the bed back together now, see how everything fits, and talk about the last things we gotta do. All right, guys, so I got the bed put back together. Everything fits really good. Those rails aren't sticking out past the legs anymore. A few spots need a real light sanding, that's it. So it's looking really good. So that's done. So I'm gonna talk to you guys about the last few issues going on here. and what the plan to move forward is with that. So what I'm looking at now is this huge gap here, and we've talked about why that happened. My overestimation of how thick this plywood is, by 1/32 of an inch. So, you know, it's partially that and partially measuring mistakes on my part. So that problem remains, and there's not a whole lot to do about this, but I have an idea. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. And you can also see some sort of gappy issues here, a little bit here, maybe a little bit here, and that's just where the saw got away from me a little bit. Getting better at my hand sawing, but I'm not perfect. So, you know, that got away from me there. Creates some unsightly gaps. Also, the edges here where I'm pointing, over time, you know, that's edge grain of plywood that can break out real easy. It's always been part of the plan to add some trim to this bed. I've got some cedar boards that I'm going to use for that. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cap that sits on top of the leg here. It covers the whole piece, so this edge grain of the plywood isn't exposed. And then it'll match where the trim is on the side rails here and here. And we'll do that when we get to the trim. So besides that huge gaping barbarian hole that I made in the other leg, that pretty much covers all the issues for the bed as far as mistakes that I made. Tackling that hole in the other leg over there is going to be the next big project, or the next job for this bed. So let's get started on that, and that'll be the end of the issues, guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a plug to put in there. I'm going to first cut the railing into a square, kind of an L-shaped notch out of this tip right here. And then I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch size piece of plywood to fit that and see if that doesn't bring me up flush with this. All right, guys, that should pretty much handle the last issue that we had with this bed until I find more. But we're gonna come back tomorrow after this glue's dry on that little plug on the rail we just did. Sand it down, make sure it fits all tight, and make sure everything's copacetic. And then we'll wrap up this video. So yeah, that should do it. See you tomorrow. All right, guys, we are back. I'm ready to finish fixing that hole that I put in the leg. You saw yesterday, we put the glue on. Now we're gonna take it out of the clamps and shape it up. Let's get to it. So that wraps up this video, you guys. Thank you for watching. Here's a quick roundabout of the bed, all the issues we fixed. We fixed the rail sticking out from the legs on top, on the sides, and on the outsides. And I talked to you about that large gap and what we're gonna do about that. I fixed that hole I put in the leg and the issue with too much planing. And it's looking really good, you guys. It's starting to come together. So thank you for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Press the like button. Those things are gonna help my channel out a lot. And leave some feedback, leave some comments if you have any. Appreciate you guys. See you next time.